So let's work on the front end again, and let's give the user some feedback about what's going on. For this, I'll use a similar approach as I did earlier in the course. I'll show some notifications. For this attached, you find a UI zip file, which you can extract and then just move into your components folder. It's a folder, a UI folder then, with one component in it, the notification component, with some styles. And if you followed along with the previous course sections, this will look fairly familiar. That's a notification, which we can show at the bottom of the screen to give the user some indication for whether data is on its way, it succeeded, or if the request failed. And I want to utilize this again now. Now, before in this course, we implemented this with context, with the context API. I used context there because we triggered this notification from different places in our application. Here, in this blog project, we actually don't have that scenario. Here, we actually only need the notification for the contact form. We could still use context, though, to make this more versatile and allow using it in different parts. But we could also just use notification, this component, in the contact form component only, and not set up context and all the other parts to manage it. And I will do that. I will just use it locally here, but of course, as an extra exercise, definitely also feel free to use context again, just as we did it earlier in the course. Now, as I said, I'll use it locally though, and therefore in the contact form component, I'll import notification from going up one level, UI notification. And the goal is to show it whilst the request is on its way and also once it's done, once we have a success or an error. That means that we need a new piece of state here. We need to find out what our current state is. So I'll add use state and don't set any initial value, but I'll name it request status and set request status. And request status can be pending, success, or error. That's my definition. So pending, success, or error. That are the three possible values we can save in there, or null, undefined initially, if we have no ongoing or finished request. Okay, so now we want to set the request status as we send our request here. Now I used fetch with then and catch in the previous course sections, and we could do this here as well, but to mix things up, and because it's a bit more convenient to work with fetch when using async await, I will use async await here. And I'll turn the send message handler function into an async function, which allows me to use the await keyword here. Then we get the response here, and we can use the response thereafter. Now from the response, we want to get the data by awaiting response JSON. And now, that's the part where async await is more convenient. We can check if response OK is not true. So if not response OK, which means we have an error. In this case, I will throw a new error where I set my message equal to data message if our response data has a message, or to something went wrong as a fallback. Else, thereafter, we know that everything worked. Now, to not have all this HTTP logic in here, and to be able to conveniently try catch the entire HTTP block in one go, I will grab that code here, where we fetch and parse the data and handle the not OK case, and cut that and move it into a separate function. A function which we can add in that same contact form.js file, or a function which we could add in a different file. Here I'll add it in the same file and add my async send contact data function. So async function send contact data. And here I now just expect that I get the contact details as an argument, and that is then the object which will be added as a body, converted to JSON, of course, the contact details. So now I have the logic in here, and now in send message handler, we just need to await send contact data, and pass our object where we set the email to entered email and so on to that function here. So here name is set to entered name and message is set to entered message, like this. Now we still await this because that's an async function and we also use await in here. We could return the data here, the parsed response data, but since I don't care about it here in this component, we don't really need to. So now we got that. Now that's a bit leaner. And now, before we send the contact data, I want to set my request status, so update this state here, to pending. So I'll set it to pending. Now once we're done, thereafter, I want to set it to success. If that fails, I want to set it to error, and hence I'll try this here and catch any errors that might be thrown from anywhere in this request and set the request status to error. And hence success is not set thereafter, because then it would also be set if we had an error, but here instead of try. Now we have these different status updates, and now we can use them to show our notification. Now to show the notification, I want to render this notification component, which we are already importing, based on the status, and based on the status also with different data. For this, in this contact form component function, I want to derive the data for my notification. I'll add a notification data variable, and initially it's undefined. We can also just name it notification. But then I'll check if request status is equal to pending, and if that's the case, I'll set notification equal to an object where the status is set to pending, the title is set to sending message, and the message of this notification could be set to your message is on its way. Now, if request status is equal to success, I want to set notification to a different object. Then notification should be set to an object where the status, of course, is success, where the title is success, like this, and where the message is message sent successfully. And last but not least, the last data package I want to infer is for request status equal to error. In that case, I want to set my notification equal to a status where I set error, a title of error, and now to get the error message here, we actually need to get it out of this error object and set a separate state for that. So I'll add a new state here, use state, request error state, and a set request error updating function. Initially it's undefined, but if we have a request error here, I'll set my request error to the error message I get here. So then here, when we derive the data for the notification, we can set message equal to request error, like this. Okay, so now we got the data for the notification, and we could break this component into multiple smaller components if we wanted to, since it's getting a bit bigger, but I'll leave it as one component for the moment. Now we have that different data, we have the different pieces of data. Now we want to render the notification if we do have a notification to show. So in the end, if notification is anything but undefined, because if it is undefined, there is nothing to show. So then here, in this section, for example, we can add a conditional content and check for notification. And if it's truthy, we render the notification component and we set status equal to notification.status, and we set title equal to notification.title, and we set message equal to notification.message. like this. And status, title, and message are the props I'm expecting inside of that notification component. So we have to set them here. So that should now be working with all that work done. If we now reload and I again enter something here, test, if I click send message, we see that sending state and then the success state. Now it never disappears at the moment, but that's something we can also implement with help of useEffect, as we saw earlier in the course. We can run a function whenever the request status changes. And if it changed to success or error, then we want to reset it to undefined after 3 seconds, let's say, and that will then re-render this component and get rid of our notification. So here we can execute useEffect and define an effect function and the dependencies. And here in useEffect, I want to check if request status is equal to pending, or if request status is equal to error. So if it's either of the two, then if that is the case, I want to set a timer to reset my request status. So then I'll set a timeout here to 3 seconds. And after 3 seconds, this function will execute, and there I'll set request status to null, reset it basically. We can also set request error to null here to reset this as well. And now request status is a dependency of useEffect, so that this effect function will re-execute whenever the request status changes, and only when that changes. So when we change entered email because we type in the email field, we will not execute this again. Now if it executes again and we have an ongoing timer, I want to get rid of the existing timer though, and hence I'll store a reference in a constant here and return that cleanup function where I call clear timeout and clear that timer, if that effect should rerun whilst we have an ongoing timer. And of course here I don't want to check for request status pending, but success I mean. So success or error. If the request status is anything else, we don't do anything. Okay, so now if we save this, it should disappear. Let me also open up the DevTools to see if we got any errors there. Max, another try, click send message, sending, success, and it disappears. And if I hammer this button and I send multiple messages, it still only disappears once after 3 seconds because the timers get cleared. So that is working. All that data also did end up here on MongoDB. If we refresh, we see all those messages here, so that worked. And therefore now we also show some feedback. Let's now see if it also works if something breaks. For this, I'll go to the API route and break my credentials, like this, save this, and try sending this request again, and then we have that error case here, which also disappears after 3 seconds though. So that's also working, and with that, let's fix it again. So this all works. As a last step, we maybe want to clear the user input after it was sent, and for this back in the contact form, we can basically go here where we set the request status to success, and say that if the request is a success, we want to clear what the user entered, because then the message was sent and the input isn't needed anymore. So here we could set entered message to an empty string again, set entered email to an empty string, and set entered name to an empty string. Since we're binding all those state values back to the inputs, here and here and here, if we change the state, those changes will be reflected in the inputs. So if we do that, then if I reload again, and again enter something here, last try, then if I click send message, you'll see that the input disappears as soon as we have a success. And therefore now this is the final state of this contact form and of the overall blog, at least when it comes to what we see on the screen.